up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Ask Paul. My name is Paul Abernathy, your host, and welcome to the podcast where we answer your electrical questions via our portal over on paulabernathy.com. So if you're not familiar with that, just go jump on over to it. Paul, P-A-U-L, Abernathy, A-B-E-R-N-A-T-H-Y.com, all one word, and you'll see a portal. And in that portal, you fill out some information, put your question in there, click the submit button. It will come directly to me, and I'll either answer your question via email or I will do a podcast on it. And if I do a podcast on it, then we all can learn from your question. And I will not only answer your question, but probably answer questions from many people out there who ask questions all the time. So in today's episode of Ask Paul, we get asked, Paul, can you explain the ampere rating of 15 and 20 amp receptacles, as well as single receptacles on an individual brand circuit when it's 15 or 20 amp rated? Okay. Now, first thing I'll tell you is that it goes all the way up to 50 amps, and you would really want to go look at 210.21, B1, B2, and B3, and you'll see a little table associated, and it kind of gives you an idea of the ratings of receptacles based on the brand circuit. And it should be pretty straightforward. But again, there is a few things that are associated with it that do get people confused. So we're going to go over those today and kind of hash those out. And maybe that's the question that the individual is asking. Hopefully I nail it. And if not, reach out to me again and ask for more clarity, and I'll be more than happy to do that. Now let's talk about, since you brought up 15 and 20 amp rated circuits, receptacle brand circuits are generally going to be 20 amp rated for things like laundry areas, bathrooms, garages, kitchens, of course, except for the individual brand circuit going to, let's say, a refrigerator, which could be 15 amperes or greater, but that's an individual brand circuit. But the small appliance brand circuits are typically going to be 20 amps. Your dining rooms, your parlors, your breakfast rooms, and similar, they're going to be 20 amp brand circuits. Of course, the National Electrical Code tells us the minimum number of small appliance brand circuits with a minimum of 2. You could have more than that. But when we're looking at it, everything else throughout the dwelling that is not associated with those things that are stipulated as 20 amp circuits, they would be 15 amps. Now, that's not to say, some people say, I'm not going to run 15 amp brand circuits to my receptacles, even in the bedrooms. And that's fine. That's a design choice. As far as the code's concerned, those receptacles can be 15 amps. Code's okay with that, right? And in those 15 amp brand circuits, let's say in a bedroom, you would also be permitted to cover the lighting as well. So you can have both lighting or receptacles or both on the same brand circuit. Now that would be the 15 amp brand circuit. Now, if you chose to use 20 amp brand circuits for those applications in a bedroom, that's fine. You still can put the lighting and receptacles on that same brand circuit. But there are certain areas within a dwelling that are required to be 20 amperes. And again, that's the small appliance brand circuits, all those circuits that also supply, again, the kitchen and the bathroom receptacles, things like that. Of course, there is an exception for the bathroom to have the lighting on it as well, as long as that brand circuit doesn't leave that bathroom, but that's a little bit more than what we're going to go in on tonight's episode, okay? Anyhow, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the receptacle ratings and how they correlate to a circuit breaker. And we're only going to do 15 and 20 amp rated, okay? Because I think that's the majority of what you're going to run into. And everything else other than that's pretty straightforward. So here's where people tend to get confused. When we're dealing with what's called a duplex receptacle, which is probably what you've got in your bedroom or countertop or whatever. It looks like two ports in it. That is a receptacle device, and that counts as 2 receptacles. That's why we call it a duplex. But you could have put a simplex in there, or it's a single receptacle. Okay, so it's the same one strap, but instead of having the 2 plug-ins in it, it just has 1, and that's it. And that would be what we refer to as a single receptacle or a simplex receptacle, and that is 1 single receptacle. So you're going to see throughout the code where it makes references, and you're going to notice that in 210.21 B1, 2, and 3 that we're going to be talking about, most notably B1 and B3, is that it talks about the receptacles, and it'll either be a single receptacle or 2 or more, which is a duplex, okay? But it could be a quadplex, could be a triplex, okay? But it is definitely 2 or more and that is what you're going to deal with. So simplex, single, duplex, 2 receptacles. Okay, keep that in your mind. All right, now, so what I'm going to do is to answer the gentleman's question. I assume it's a gentleman. I'm going to answer the question. I'm going to really logically go down the list by talking about 15 amp breakers and 20 amp breakers and how they correlate with a receptacle, because that's what the question is, the ratings. Okay, so we'll start with the duplex receptacles and we'll end with simplex or single receptacles. And you're going to see that the code is slightly different. It tells you can do one thing for a simplex, but you can't do this for a duplex. And I'm going to explain it, so don't worry. And I'm going to do one at a time, make it very simple to understand. So let's look at the very first one. Okay, so the very first thing we're dealing with is a 15 amp circuit breaker. Okay, it could be a fuse, but we'll say probably more modern homes are dealing in circuit breakers. So it's a 15 amp circuit breaker. What can I put on that 15 amp circuit breaker? What's the rating of the devices? The devices being a receptacle, can I put on that 15 amp circuit breaker? So let's cover duplexes first. So on a 15 amp breaker, I can put a 15 amp rated receptacle. Okay, makes sense? Obviously, it's a 15 amp rated circuit breaker. It's a 15 amp rated receptacle. Everything's fine. Good to go. Now, can I put a 20 amp rated receptacle on a 15 amp circuit breaker? And the answer is no, you cannot. Okay, so that's the first thing to remember. You cannot use a 20 amp rated duplex receptacle on a 15 amp rated overcurrent protected device. You can't do it. Okay, so 15 amp breaker, 15 amp rated receptacle. 15 amp breaker, you cannot put a 20 amp rated duplex receptacle on it. Okay, makes sense, right? Okay, hang with me now. So now we're going to jump up to a 20 amp rated overcurrent protected device, in our case, circuit breaker. So on a 20 amp rated circuit breaker, can I run 12 gauge out and put it on a 15 amp rated receptacle? The answer is yes, I can. I most certainly can do that. Table 210.21b3 tells me I can. So then the next question is, well, obviously I can put a 20 amp rated receptacle on a 20 amp circuit breaker as well, right? Absolutely you can. So this is why countertops and kitchens, which is, small appliance brand circuits, got to be at least 2 20 amp small appliance brand circuits. You could put 15 amp receptacles up there or 20 amp receptacles in there. The difference really is the faceplate. One's got the little slash notch on it, and the other ones are both vertical. And then you got one that's the neutral, which is both vertical and has a slot at horizontal. That's a 20 amp rated device. But you can use a 15 or 20 amp with a 20 amp circuit breaker. Perfectly fine. You just can't use a 20 amp on a 15 amp circuit breaker. And that's where most people get it kind of wrong. Okay. So yes, so the answer is, if you want to put a 20 amp brand circuit to your countertops in your kitchen, but you want to use the 15 amp rated duplex receptacles instead of 20 amp rated, go for it. Have at it. And it also applies to GFCI devices as well. Whether 15 or 20 amp, they're perfectly fine as well. Not an issue. Okay. So that pretty much covers, and we'll wrap that up at the end with a recap on that one, but that pretty much covers our circuit breakers and our duplex receptacles. Pretty straightforward. Right? Again, summary, 15 amp breaker, 15 amp duplex, perfectly fine. 15 amp breaker, 20 amp receptacle, duplex, not good. That's a violation. Okay, violation. A 20 amp circuit breaker with a 15 amp duplex receptacle is perfectly okay. And that is per 210.21b3 and associated table. Also, 20 amp circuit breaker, obviously a 20 amp rated duplex is perfectly fine as well. Okay, so that's okay. So we've pretty much covered those with the duplexes and the 15 and 20 amp brand circuits. Now we're going to move into what's called the simplex receptacle. That's a single receptacle, still one strap. The difference between the duplex is there are 2 receptacles on the strap. With the simplex, there's only one in the middle. It's just one receptacle. Okay. Now, when dealing with duplexes, it's pretty straightforward. Again, you're going to go to table 210.21b3 and you can see that's 2 or more. When dealing with the simplex or single receptacle, you got to look at 210.21b1. So let's cover the same exercise and you're going to see something a little different here. I have a 15 amp rated circuit breaker and I have a 15 amp rated single receptacle, we refer to as a simplex receptacle. That is perfectly okay. And it should be, right? 20 amp circuit, 20 amp rated device, everything should be good. The next 15 amp rated circuit breaker, can I put that, a 15 amp breaker now, can I use a 20 amp single receptacle? Now remember, we couldn't use a 20 amp duplex on a 15, but here we can put a 20 amp single on a 15 amp. Why? Because 210.21b1 says that the device cannot be less than the rating of the branch circuit. Well, the 20 amp rated single device is greater than the 15 amp branch circuit, keeping in mind that you're still going to limit your load to the 15 amps. Okay. So it is okay. So in this scenario, it is okay because of the way the code reads. You might say, well, that doesn't make sense. You should be able to do it with the other one too. I get it, but that's not what the code reads. So if you're going to put a single receptacle in there, you can put a 20 amp single on a 15 amp overcurrent device and you're perfectly fine. Okay. All right. Next, what about a 20 amp rated circuit breaker and a 15 amp simplex receptacle? The answer is no. See how it's opposite here? Previously on a 20, you could have put a 15 amp duplex, but when you're dealing with a single receptacle, a simplex receptacle, you cannot use a 15 amp. Why? Because under the rules for the individual branch circuit, the device has to be equal to or greater than the branch circuit. Okay, well, that 15 is not equal to or greater than the 20 amp overcurrent device, so that would be a violation based on how it's written in 210.21b1. So you can't have a 20 amp device, overcurrent device, and a 15 amp simplex. So in the real world, you're just going to bump that up to a 20 amp simplex and be done with it, right? Or you're going to do what? You're just going to put a duplex in there and walk away. You get me? Okay, so you can't do that. So the next one is, well, obviously this is a no-brainer. If it's a 20 amp rated circuit breaker, then you're going to put in a 20 amp rated single receptacle and you're okay because it equal to or greater than the rating of the branch circuit, which is whatever the breaker's rated at. Okay. And then I'll remind you again at the end, if it was a 20 amp rated circuit breaker, I can put a 15 amp duplex on it. I just cannot use a 15 amp simplex on that 20 amp branch circuit. You with me? Hopefully that is crystal clear. But the key is to reading the language in 210.21b1 to understand. Okay. And we do this all the time for these applications. And you really sometimes just don't think about it, but we do. Okay. Okay. Let's see here. That's pretty much all I wanted to cover for that episode. Hopefully that answers your question, the ampere ratings. But if you want to see things like for 30 amp ratings, 40 and 50 amp ratings and whatnot, then just go look at the allowances in 210.21b3. Go look at what happens if it's a single receptacle in 210.21b1. Okay. So yes, I can have a 50 amp rated receptacle, a simplex, on a 40 amp rated circuit as long as my load doesn't exceed the 40 for a individual branch circuit. But that 50 amp single does equal or exceed the rating of the branch circuit. So that's why you're able to do that for the single. Okay. So we get so many things that we look at. And of course, duplexes in that scenario all fall again under 210.21b3. So go check it out. Hopefully I've explained it to you. You now understand the ratings of receptacles and what you can and what you can't do. If you have any questions or I just got you confused, go back and listen again, because some people seem to think I say what they think they want to hear, but you got to go listen to it. Catch you next time. Remember, you can submit your questions to Ask Paul at any time. We appreciate them. And again, thanks. And check out our Fast Tracks program if you really want to learn the NEC. All of this and more is covered in that program. Just check it out over at electricalcodeacademy.net, .org, or .com, and you can learn more about the National Electrical Code. Till next time, stay safe. God bless.